You might have heard of before, though. We're still not entirely sure what his name is. It seems like at the moment he goes by George Santos, but that could change.
Have you ever wanted a podcast that did it all? Sports, politics, world events. Well, you have come to the right place, because you are listening to C&C Talks.
Hello, I'm Colin.
And I'm Charlie.
And welcome to the C&C Talks podcast. This is episode 33 of season 2.
Just reminders, we do every week. We release every Wednesday, although currently it is Wednesday. We talk about politics, world events, and sports. There's currently Wednesday, October 18th, 2023 at about 8 p.m. Pacific time. And we got to have a packed week this week because as soon as we decide to record an episode, put an episode out, the entire House of Representatives decides that it's going to stop functioning. A war in the Middle East started, and a good chunk of the government got indicted.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, just absolutely packed, and that's not even counting everything that we'll discuss in the sports section as well. But real quick, Charlie, before we get into it, we put something out online about this last week, but we do again want to apologize for some of the things that one of our guests last week, or really our main guest, as the other two guests were also work on the podcast, but our main guest said on last week's episode, made some claims that were either not true or incomplete, and we do apologize. We know that we have a duty to make sure that we only put out true stuff, and we failed at that last week, so we apologize for that. But now, Charlie, let's get into it with the speaker election, as the House is still just in chaos. As of when we're recording this, there's 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks without a speaker since Republicans vacated Kevin McCarthy, and there is no clear path out right now. No clear path for anybody to get to the 217 votes that would be necessary to win the speakership. The Republicans met last week. They nominated Scalise. It was clear that Scalise was going to be short. Scalise dropped out. They met again. They nominated Jim Jordan, the far-right candidate who helped orchestrate January 6th, and he's now had 2 votes on the floor. He's come up well short. He got 200 votes in the first one, 199 in the second one, well short of the 217 needed. Democrats all been voting for Hakeem Jeffries, and that has gone smoothly, Charlie. Jeffries continuing to get the most votes, 212 every single time. What do you make of this absolute chaos going on Capitol Hill this week, Charlie?
Well, first of all, considering what happened in January with the 15 ballots, does Hakeem Jeffries have the most votes ever now?
I'm not positive, but I think he might, and if not, it's really close, because there's now been 17 elections as of when we're taping this. There was probably more by the time this episode gets released. Who knows? Maybe there's a speaker, though. I kind of doubt that there will be a speaker by the time this episode's released. I don't know when there will be a speaker, Charlie.
Well, yes, the big problem right now for the leader of that race, Jim Jordan, is he's currently losing votes. As of now, he got 200. He lost 1 vote the second time around than he had in round 1 of voting. And if this
or round 16 of voting, depending on how you look at it.
And if this trend continues, then he is in some deep trouble. I don't think McCarthy is going to have a rebound. I don't think he can. Scalise can't get there.
He's done.
Scalise can't get there. So then the question is, who's left? That's the real question. Who in the Republican Party is going to be able to do anything? Because Jordan, really, if he wants to become speaker, he has one of 2 options. He can either continue to try to work with the Republicans, his colleagues, which hasn't worked. He's losing votes, and he's not convincing anyone in his own party to vote for him. Or he can try to work with Democrats, and he's not going to do that, because that's exactly why he and his allies removed McCarthy.
Well, yeah, and Jordan definitely isn't going to work with Democrats, or more accurately, Democrats are not going to work with Jim Jordan, right? You just have to remind yourself of who Jim Jordan is. Again, he was a crucial part of the plot to overthrow the government on January 6th. That's not a guy that I think Democrats would be keen to put third in line to the presidency. It's not a guy who anybody should be keen to put third in line to the presidency, but Charlie, like you said, I don't know who can get the votes. I don't know if there's anyone in the world that could get the votes. And it's important that it's somebody, Charlie, because the House has real stuff it has to do that it just can't do right now because they don't have a speaker.
Yes, and let's get to that stuff. The war in the Middle East, Israel and Palestine, Israel and Hamas, shall we say. The war between those two continues. There was an event on Tuesday where a hospital was hit by a missile, killing 500 people. The interesting debate has come up over who exactly did this, though, as Hamas has blamed Israel for the missile, but according to the Israel and the U.S. Department of Defense, it was a failed launch by a Hamas missile that caused this. And this has led to massive protests across the Middle East, from Egypt to Syria to Lebanon to Iraq and Iran. Huge protests protesting against the U.S. There were big protests, particularly in Lebanon, against the U.S. Embassy. People were throwing rocks and launching fireworks at the embassy building. No one in the embassy was harmed, but no one can leave as of yet. And this actually brings up the very real possibility that this conflict could spiral into something way bigger than it currently is, involving many nations in the Middle East, and of course that could draw the U.S. in as well. And this is actually relates to our next story, with the U.S. refreezing some assets to Iran that we actually a few weeks ago talked about them unfreezing.
Yeah, they unfroze them in that hostage deal, but now refreezing those assets, working with the U.S. has been working with Qatar, decided that given that Iran's closest to Hamas, that this was probably the right way to sanction them. But Charlie, just to go back to that hospital story, I believe that Hamas was the first to say something about it, said this was an Israeli missile, and everyone basically started blaming Israel for it. Now it looks like it was almost certainly just a misfire of a Hamas missile, which is tragic, though it seems unintentional. That does not take away from the enormous loss of life here. And again, showing that Hamas does not care at all about civilians. But Charlie, I think that brings up another point, which is that while this may not have been done by Israel, it does seem like Israel is taking steps right now that are, I mean, you'd expect them to be drastic given that they were attacked by a terrorist group, but in a way that does seem to seriously be harming civilians living in Gaza, either by killing them, whether intentionally or not, or definitely displacing them from their homes for at least the time being.
Yes, as in Gaza city itself, there's very little power, food and water supplies are beginning to run out. The U.S. was trying to broker a deal between Egypt and Israel to allow aid to flow in, though those negotiations really have not gone anywhere. And Biden actually held a speech last night, as of when we were recording this, discussing the events, and I believe that was a very well-handled speech, and actually I suggest to our editors that we put a link to that in the description of this video if you would like to listen to that.
Yeah, and he was in Israel too, Charlie.
And yes, right? He was in Israel. And actually, because he was in Israel, he's the first American president of Israel during a time of war, but because he had gone to Israel, a planned meeting later this week with Arab leaders in Jordan was canceled.
Yeah, correct. And Biden he's now been to 2 war zones, Charlie, because he was in Ukraine as well, which is another thing that this Congress will need to get done soon, but they can't without the Speaker of the House, as well as they have now less than a month to pass a budget, Charlie. But let's move on to a member of that Congress who you might have heard of before, though we're still not entirely sure what his name is. It seems like at the moment he goes by George Santos, but that could change by the day, it seems. He's been indicted again, Charlie, and this is kind of more of the same. A superseding indictment in New York, federal charges, felonies, lots of potential jail time here if he's convicted, conspiracy, wire fraud, campaign finance stuff, all the good stuff that George Santos is just known for, besides just being a serial liar, obviously. And he says he's not guilty. He says he'll try to prove his innocence, and I'm like, dude, how about you first prove to us what your name is? But Charlie, what are your thoughts on this superseding indictment?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. The man that is known as George Santos is, of course, indicted again. He will probably find a way to be indicted yet again. Um,
In Brazil,
and we'll
maybe.
see how this continues. Now let's move on to another member of our government who's been indicted, New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, who was indicted on bribery charges. Actually, he was indicted again on similar grounds during a retreat for his donors. He was actually not in the country at the time that this happened. This
Ironic.
is an event that he holds every year. Usually draws quite a big crowd from his donors and political allies. And this was a disaster for him. Basically, no one showed up. There was a bunch of empty tables, a lot of food left out. It was just really an absolute disaster for him. He's been
But
indicted
the Feds
again.
showed up.
The feds did show up. There's pressure mounting against him from his own party. I think that it's time for him to resign. He is pleading not guilty, says he will not resign. But you have to imagine if he is up for election in 2024, which I believe he is in some deep trouble.
Yeah, and Charlie, we've got to get to the nature of these charges here, because these charges are deeply, deeply serious charges. So the first one, like you said, it was regards to bribery. This one, he's basically been indicted for being a foreign agent for the government of Egypt. Yeah, a foreign agent in the U.S. Senate. A reminder, he still gets classified briefings, including on Israel, which Egypt is pretty involved with the conflict between Israel and Hamas at the moment. Maybe Menendez shouldn't be getting those classified briefings when he's compromised by one of those countries, right? Charlie, again, we literally have a foreign agent in the United States Senate right now.
Yeah, that's a problem.
You know, a pretty big problem. What?
The race for U.S. president is also getting insane and crazy. We have a new candidate. Who is this man? What is he doing?
Yeah, Charlie. His name is Cenk Uygur, I believe is how you pronounce it, and may have heard of him or not. He's the head of the Young Turks, a progressive YouTube channel. The Young Turks, pretty popular, but Cenk Uygur, he's now running in the Democratic primary as a very, very far left challenger to Joe Biden. Now, why would we bring this up? We don't really think that there is any serious threat to Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination. Do we think that Cenk Uygur is a big threat? No, we don't. In fact, we actually think that there is literally no threat, given that one big problem, Charlie, with Cenk Uygur's campaign is that he is not he was not born in the United States. He is a naturalized citizen, and thus he is ineligible to run for president, Charlie.
Yeah, that's going to deal some damage to his campaign. Just by the way, a little bit of history on the Young Turks. They were responsible for a coup in the Ottoman Empire in 1808, which led to the Ottoman government in World War I, and also led to the genocide of the Armenians during the First World War.
Yeah, thanks for that context. And Charlie, before we move on to sports, let's talk a little bit more about the GOP presidential primary, because we think that Trump has probably locked it up, but there is some interesting stuff going down ballot. DeSantis continues to flame out. Only 4 candidates, Charlie, have qualified for the debate at the beginning of November, which will be hosted by NBC News. Only candidates that have qualified so far: Trump, who says he's not going to attend, DeSantis, Ramaswamy, and Nikki Haley. So there's still time for others to qualify. We'll see if they do. But Charlie, Mike Pence has been a big candidate. Turns out his campaign is, I believe, over $600,000 in debt, Charlie.
Okay, so he's done.
I mean, where did he think his base was in the first place?
Well, yeah, his main problem is that he's basically just saying the same thing that Trump is saying. Well, he was the vice president under the guy, so you must agree with what he's saying, and if you didn't, why were you his vice president? So if you're agree with the policies that Trump had, why wouldn't you vote for him? Why would you vote for Pence? I don't understand why he thought this was a good idea. I don't know where he thought his base was going to be, but clearly it's not where he thought it is, and that's his campaign over, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Pence's biggest break from Trump is with the certification of the election. Otherwise, Pence was about as loyal as you could be as a vice president. Really fascinating to see all of Trump world shift flip on Pence. But Charlie, I think that this brings up a bigger problem within the Republican Party of how you beat Trump in a primary. And because generally, if you're going to win, if you want to draw a contrast with somebody who's leading in the polls, which you kind of have to do if you want to win the primary, you have to either propose different policies or you have to prove that you have a better shot at winning than the front runner. And Trump doesn't really have any policies, and neither does the rest of the GOP. It's mostly just culture wars, so there's no policies there. So basically, they have to prove that they can win, that they have a better chance of winning than him, and they can't really do that because
they don't have a better chance of winning.
Well, no, not that. They might have a better chance of winning, but that's not a message that works with the GOP base because the entire party has spent the last 2.5 years trying to convince everybody that Trump actually did win, and so he can win because he's already done it. And they can't go against the big lie because that's already so ingrained into Republican primary voters' minds, and they're not going to flip on that. So that's really the problem with anyone trying to challenge Trump, I think.
Absolutely. All right. I do have a Charlie's Thing of the Week this week for you.
Oh, good. What is it?
It's a football-based one.
All right.
We saw the undefeated teams get knocked out this week when finally handed their first loss, both 49ers and the Eagles. But here's my question for you. What was the closest time to now? So what was the closest team to current day to start the season 10-0?
Ooh, wow. Was it the 2020 Pittsburgh Steelers? Did they start 10-0 or did they not quite make it to 10?
Well done. They started 11-0. And here's a question for you. How did their season end?
It ended in tragically hilarious fashion. They kind of crashed for the couple weeks, fell not just out of the 1 seed, but they fell out of the 2 seed as well, which was the Bills that year, I believe. They were the 3 seed. Yeah, 3 seed in the AFC North. So they won that division. First playoff game was against, I believe, the Cleveland Browns, Charlie.
Yes, against the Cleveland Browns, who made the playoffs.
And the Browns won.
2003.
And the Browns won. Sad, like genuinely sad. Browns haven't been back since. And Charlie, as we now move on to sports, I don't think that they'll be back anytime soon. And we will start with the NFL, and we'll start with that Thursday night game last week.
You say the Browns aren't coming back after they beat the 49ers.
That's true. We'll get to that game in a minute, but we'll start with that Thursday night game between the Broncos and the Chiefs. Chiefs winning 19-8. Broncos now 1-5, Charlie. Your thoughts on both of these teams? Chiefs, they haven't lost since that opening game against the Lions. Seem to absolutely be back on track right now.
If you look at the Chiefs, if you look at what's happened with them, they are objectively a 500 team right now. They have gotten every call to go their way so far this season, and I know that happens. They have not played to the level that I thought that they would. They've eked out a couple of wins that they should have easily gotten. They barely snuck past the Jets. They barely got past Minnesota. So I think if they start playing teams like Cincinnati, teams like Buffalo, even teams like Jacksonville, I think they're really going to start having some trouble, and I think those losses may start piling up.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the Chiefs not be at their best early in the season before. We've definitely seen that the last couple years, and they're 5-1 this year. But I'd agree that at least so far they just don't look like the team that they were last year. But what about the Broncos, Charlie? We love talking about them.
This is a disaster, and it is not Russell Wilson's fault. Russell Wilson has been playing pretty well.
Yeah,
this is on the defense. This is on the defense. Their defense has been historically awful. They gave up 70 points to the Dolphins.
Yep.
Their only win is against the Bears.
And they gave up a bunch of points to them too.
Yes, they did.
Is it time to fire Sean Payton?
Disaster. It wasn't Russell Wilson's fault. It's Sean Payton, and it's the defense.
Should they fire Payton, though?
They might need to.
I mean, they traded so much for him.
They absolutely did. Now, let's look around the rest of the league. The Bengals are coming back. They had a big win against Seattle this weekend. Seattle did not play very well. Their offense did not get it done in crucial situations. 2 fourth downs within the 15-yard line. Both ended with Geno Smith being sacked. But this is a huge win for Cincinnati. I feel like they're back on track.
Yeah, I'd say that I agree. I'm also not too worried about the Seahawks. Seahawks had every opportunity to win that game. It was just in the red zone. They didn't quite have it. It happens. If it starts to become more of a pattern, then I'd be more concerned. But Charlie, I want to look towards what happened in London, our final London game of the year. It was between the Ravens and the Titans, and I don't think we got a surprising result. Would you agree?
No, the Ravens took care of business, got the win. They're looking good. This is going to be a great battle for the AFC North. The Bengals are back. The Ravens are finding form. Lamar hasn't been hurt yet. But the Steelers are a wild card, and the Browns looked great against the 49ers.
Even without their quarterback. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. But, Charlie, one more question as we wrap up this season in London. It's been rumored now that the NFL might try to hold the Super Bowl in London at some point. What are your thoughts on that possibility? Do you like it or not?
I really like that idea. I like the idea of expanding the game out even more. This opens the possibility of really even international expansion of the league when the league chooses to expand again, and you know that they obviously will at some point. I also heard rumors about possibly having a game in either Spain or Brazil next year, which I think
makes sense.
Also be great news for the sport. I don't know if they're bringing the Mexico game back at some point. I imagine.
Yeah, the stadium's under renovation this year, so I believe that they're not doing it this year.
I believe that they most likely will. We have 2 games remaining in Germany. That Week 9 game, by the way, in Germany, Chiefs and Dolphins. What a game that's going to be. But one of the questions
that's going to be great.
I really do want to highlight for you right now is we're a good chunk of the way through the season. Who if you had to rank the teams, who are your top 5 right now in the league?
Charlie, there's so much parity in the league right now, and it is great. There's a lot of 5-1 or 4-1 teams out there right now, and I feel like any of them could really give the Super Bowl, or they could go all the way. Several teams.
Give me your picks.
Don't make me do this. I don't want to say it, but I really do like the 49ers, Charlie. Let's just very, very quickly go through a couple of these morning games. Commanders and the Falcons. I don't think we need to say too much, but Charlie, Sam Howell's looked really good so far.
Please.
Oh yeah, Desmond Ritter's done.
Give Heineke a chance.
Yeah, what do you think about Howell though? Like, it's been pretty good so far.
Sam Howell is one of the very few bright spots of Washington Commanders football right now. If they can build that team around him, I think they will be a great team in years to come. And you know who else will be a great team in the years to come with their current team?
Who?
The Houston Texans.
Yeah,
C.J. Stroud is genuinely incredible.
Oh, absolutely. This was a performance, man. Big win over the Saints. They're 3-3 again. Texans' future looking very bright. They could honestly finish over 500 this season, especially with the division. Charlie, the Jaguars and the Colts, more teams in that division. They played. Jaguars won. No surprise. We were kind of sounding the alarm on them earlier this year, but they've turned it around again.
They had that big win against Buffalo in London, came back, big divisional game against Indy, got the job done. Disaster for Indianapolis. Anthony Richardson will be out for the entire season, so they will have to rely on Minshew Mania to try to hold on to any chance that they had of doing anything this season. They really need Richardson back. You really feel like of the quarterbacks drafted, the Texans were really the only one who nailed their pick this year.
Well, I'd say that nailed it in terms of how they would perform this year, right? I think we have to really wait a couple years for us to really know, especially with Richardson because he's injured, and I actually really did like the start that he had. Charlie, another team that's 5-1 that I think could absolutely win, a team that scored 42 points this week, the Dolphins, the Dolphins, though admittedly against the worst team in the NFL, the Panthers.
Yeah, the Dolphins were very on and off. They, of course, had that blowout against Denver. They looked amazing this week against Carolina despite a slow start. However, they did lose A-Chain, their great running back this week. But I'm worried about the Dolphins. They came into a big divisional match against Buffalo, and they just fell apart.
Yeah, and that's truly the only great team that they've played. Like, they've played some other good teams, but that's truly the only other great team that they've played. So they'll have plenty of more tests down the road. Starting soon.
They had an ugly loss against Jacksonville in London, and they lost their opener to the Bills, which was to the Jets, which is a very unfortunate turn of events for them.
Yeah, let's talk about a game that no one wants to talk about, Charlie, which is the Vikings and the Bears.
This was
a terrible game. It was a bad game by two bad teams, and the Vikings came out on top, and that's really the only way to look at it. Agree?
Yes, I agree. So I'm going to want to ask you, though, do you think that the Vikings should trade Kirk Cousins?
I think if you're trading Cousins, is that also kind of letting Jefferson walk out the door or not? Would Jefferson welcome?
I think it is.
Cousins
I think you might have to let Jefferson leave. A couple other games that I did want to highlight real quick before we move on. The Patriots season is over.
It's over. It's very, very, very over.
It is time
They're terrible. But the Raiders, Charlie, are a lot better than I thought they would be. And so same with you. You left them for me at the bottom of our draft.
Real quick stat for you.
Yeah.
Mac Jones has less passing touchdowns this month than Derrick Henry. Yes, I said passing touchdowns.
Wow. Derrick Henry has one. Sad.
Mac hasn't gotten any.
That is actually sad. Rams beat the Cardinals, Charlie. Are the Rams a competitor?
Possibly. Their competition has not been great. They've lost to the teams that they need to beat. Their only real key win was in Seattle in Week 1, and that was not the Seattle that we've seen since then.
No, it's not, except for maybe this week. But Charlie, their wide receiving core right now looking really good. Cooper Kupp had a big game. Puka Nacua, he's been incredible, though. With Kupp back, you have to wonder if his targets are going to go down somewhat. Charlie, the Eagles, we mentioned the 49ers lost to the Browns on that missed field goal. The Eagles, the other undefeated team to go down, Jalen Hurts just did not look very good throughout the game, especially in the fourth quarter through a couple of interceptions in big-time moments. And the Jets came out on top, and now there's rumors that Rodgers could actually come back at some point this regular season miraculously. We'll see if that happens. Do the Jets actually shockingly have a chance to make a run at this thing?
It is very possible. It is very possible. The one thing that I do really want to highlight, though, about this is the Jets' first win ever against the Eagles. They came into this game 0-12 against Philadelphia all time.
Wow. And won. It was ridiculous, and it was a really good win. Zach Wilson looking good. That defense is legit. I don't know if I'll say that it's a good football team, but it's not a bad one. And let's remember, they came close to beating Kansas City as well.
Yeah, yes, they did. All right, let's move on now to the MLB playoffs, and what a wild ride it has been. We are down to 4 teams, and we are really looking at this. We are really down to 2 at this point. We really down to, honestly, down to 3. The AL series is still a toss-up at this point. Texas has the upper hand, but they did lose Game 3 to Houston. Houston needed a win here. They did get it. But I think Arizona's done. Philly is going back to the World Series with a chance to get revenge.
Charlie, have you seen the energy in Citizens Bank Park?
I think whether it be Texas or Houston, they're going to need to move the walls about 50 feet back if they're going to have any chance to win the World Series.
Well, sure, but I don't just mean that. I mean, inside Citizens Bank Park, the decibel level of the crowd was up to 111, Charlie.
It is.
That place is raucous.
We are getting to earthquake territory here. And as a Seattle Seahawks fan, I know a little bit about fan earthquakes.
Yeah. Let's talk quickly about the WNBA Finals. They just wrapped up, Charlie. Asia Wilson winning the Finals MVP as the Aces take down the New York Liberty in 4 games, back-to-back championships for the Aces now. They won game 1 and game 2, lost game 3, and then in game 4 in New York, they were down big, 12 points in the second half, come back, win the game. Just a really, really good team. One of the best teams that we have ever seen assembled in any given sport. Pretty incredible stuff. Charlie, I did want to highlight one more thing actually from the NFL, which is I want to know your thoughts about the ending of that Bills-Giants game, whether there was pass interference there as the Bills took down the Giants 14-9.
Yes, I think the NFL, as I've seen repeated before, I think the NFL realized that having the Niners, Eagles, and Bills go out on all lose on the same day was a bit too much. So they had to tone the script back a little bit.
And the Raiders are back from strike too, so should be back to normal in terms of all the craziness.
We'll see how the plot twists wind, so we end up with Detroit and Kansas City in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, let's move on to college football, and we'll talk about Week 7. There's some really incredible stuff. But before that, Charlie, I realized that on last week's show, we completely forgot to mention the Red River Showdown between Oklahoma and Texas. This was one of the best Red River Showdowns we've had in a long, long time, with Oklahoma coming out on top after marching down the field in the fourth quarter to win the game.
Yeah, and this is not good news for Texas. How badly does this hurt their playoff chances?
I mean, they basically have to win out at this point, and I would be shocked if we don't see a rematch of the Red River rivalry in the Big 12 championship game, and I think that there's a real chance that's Oklahoma at 12-0 and Texas at 11-1, and the winner will probably have a good chance at going to the college football playoff. But now let's talk about the games this week, and Charlie, let's not bury the lead any longer. It's too late for prime time.
It's over. That was a disaster. 28-0 at half, and Colorado found a way to lose.
29-0. 29-0. They gave it up. Stanford's a terrible team. Like truly one of the worst in all of college football, and you let them get back into the game at first, then really make that comeback, kick that field goal to tie things up at the end of regulation. Then in overtime, first of all, absurd catch, like truly absurd catch by that Stanford wide receiver to tie up the game in first overtime. And then Shadur Sanders, throwing a pick into the end zone in second overtime. Stanford wins it with a field goal. It's over, Charlie. It
is too late for prime time. Let's move on to what I consider the game of the season.
It has to be.
Husky Stadium was electric. Huskies, Washington, ranked number 7, taking on Oregon, ranked number 8. And what a game this was.
Yeah, just absolute madness throughout. Lead changes back and forth. Oregon leads, drive down the field to take the lead. Washington comes back, takes the lead right back by 3. Then Oregon drives down again.
Last chance, marches all the way down the field with Washington's defense playing super conservative to try to prevent a long pass for a touchdown. Oregon lines up for the kick to send it in overtime and pushes it wide right. Washington wins 36-33.
One of the greatest college football games that I can ever remember watching. And Charlie, College Game Day came here to Seattle. What did you think about that episode?
That was the greatest episode of Game Day I've ever watched.
It was truly, truly incredible. Started at 6 a.m. Seattle time. It was dark, but the fans showed up. They had been there for hours in the absolute just pouring rain all through the night. It was at Red Square on the University of Washington campus. If you don't know Red Square, it's big. Like, it's really big, and that place was as full as it could get and just absolutely electric. Perfect intro by Reese Davis, perfect throughout the show. Pat McAfee's kicking contest, a Washington fan actually made the kick, first of the year. He won $30,000. Then, of course, the pick segment at the end, Charlie. It was Joel McHale. He was he had painted himself in purple and gold, and just he was funny, and he brought the energy. It was a sight to behold at the University of Washington.
So, yes, it was amazing. But one of the questions I want to highlight for you is, what does this do for both these teams' playoff chances? And more importantly, is anyone going to stop Penix's drive for the Heisman?
I don't think anyone can stop his drive for the Heisman. We'll get to that USC Notre Dame game in just a second. But Washington, do they need to win out now to go to the playoff? I say if they win out, they guarantee themselves a spot in the playoffs. If they take a loss, it becomes sketchy, and they still have some tough teams. They do play USC. They have the Pac-12. They'll probably have the Pac-12 championship, I should say. So we'll see. I'd say that they need to at least go 12-1, if not 13-0. But just really impressive from them. Charlie, you asked about the Heisman. Caleb Williams did not play well for USC as they got absolutely destroyed by Notre Dame. We saw it coming. USC has not looked great so far this year, especially their defense. That showed, giving up 48 points. What did you think?
This could not have gone worse for USC. This really damages any chance they had at really making some noise, possibly in the playoffs, and this really ruins Caleb Williams' chances of winning the Heisman. As well as I also wanted to highlight, he said that he would like partial ownership of the team that drafts him. What are your thoughts about that?
Williams? Yeah, that's not happening. Sorry. Nope. It's just not happening. Some other quick games to highlight here, and some ranked matchups. North Carolina, they took down Miami. Charlie, Miami continues to fall fast.
Yes, at least they didn't give the ball up with 33 seconds left.
Yeah. Louisville, they were ranked 14, undefeated. They lost to Pitt, a bad Pitt team this year, Charlie.
That was not a good game for Louisville, and that really damages their chances of doing anything. They fell completely out of the rankings, I believe.
Yeah, and really, I believe so, yeah.
The path forward for them looks difficult.
Yeah, UCLA, Oregon State. UCLA had picked up a pretty good win, now losing to Oregon State. Oregon State, Charlie, they had a tough loss, but they're back, I think.
Yes, and if the standings hold, it will be an electric Pac-12 championship, Oregon State, Washington, for a chance to go to the playoffs.
Yeah, it would be wild. And then Arizona, Charlie, just destroying Wazoo, who was ranked number 19. What happened?
Washington State just did not seem to have it all game, and this is really bad news for them considering their schedule and considering the fact that even if they get into a chance where they could possibly get something done, they have to play Washington in the last game of the year.
Exactly. And then one final game that I wanted to highlight before we move on, Charlie. Michigan State and Rutgers. Michigan State, they led this game 24-6 entering the fourth quarter, and then it was almost like they tried to blow it. It's just an absolute disaster class.
Well, if they tried to blow it, they succeeded because they managed to lose to Rutgers.
I mean, it's just sad. Rutgers actually, though, they're having themselves a pretty good season, on the verge of clinching a bowl game, and they're only 7 games in.
Yeah, this is a surprisingly decent Rutgers team. Now let's move on to our final topic for the day, a preview of the NHL season, which has already started. What are your thoughts so far on the first few opening games of the season, Colin?
The Kraken are bad, like really bad. They've
What
scored
happened to them?
3 goals this year total, I think, through 4 games. That's not a good mark to be at for anyone. It's pretty bad for the Kraken right now. It is what it is, and hopefully they can bounce back. Charlie, Vegas, they've gotten off to a perfect start in their title defense. Do they have a real chance of going all the way again this year?
They very well could. This Vegas team is really good, and I don't know if really anyone can stop them on their way to another NHL title or Stanley Cup.
Yeah. Boston, they had a historic year last year, but then flamed out in the playoffs. After an okay start this year, what are your expectations for the Boston Bruins this year?
I think the Bruins need to make the playoffs again, make it further than they did last year, see if they can make a Stanley Cup, which I know that they are capable of, and I think it is very possible that they can get it done this time.
Yeah, and then Connor Bedard, Charlie, the number 1 overall pick for the Chicago Blackhawks. What have you thought of his start so far, and what are your expectations for him the rest of the way?
He has looked decent. The Blackhawks need to be careful to not overuse him. Of course, prevent injury. But
remember, he's only 18.
Yeah, considering he's only 18, I think his career is off to a good start. One of my favorite moments so far that I've seen from him was that shootout shot that he tried to make that did not end well for him.
No, it was bad.
He got his first career assist either the last game or the game before that. He's off to a good start in his career. Let's hope Chicago uses him right.
Yeah, any other teams you want to highlight before we say goodnight?
No, but
last
thing I did want to highlight is we have a NBA preview next week, and we will have some guests on to share their opinions on this NBA season that is starting real soon. It's set to be a great season. We got storylines to cover, which we'll cover next week.
And Wemby's ridiculous from what we've seen in the preseason so far. We'll leave it at that till next week. All right. As you subscribe to the C&C Talks podcast, episodes coming out every single week wherever you listen to your podcasts, and visit our website, cctalks.net, to learn everything you need to know about the show. And, of course, call us with your questions, 360-389-2630. Again, that's 360-389-2630. And, of course, you can follow us on Twitter at CC Talks Podcast. For our producer Morris, production designer Zack, and our sound designer Drake, I'm Colin.
And I'm Charlie. See you next week.